The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the latest installment of ReviewPro's webinar series, Winning Strategies for Responding to Guest Surveys and Reviews. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Daniel Craig, and I'm a former hotel general manager and the founder of Renown, a hospitality consultancy that provides strategy and training in marketing, guest experience, and reputation management. It's my pleasure to host and produce this free webinar series on behalf of ReviewPro. Before we start, a few administrative details. To cut down on background noise, all attendee lines are on mute. You're welcome to ask questions and make comments at any time during the webinar using the module on the sidebar of your screen. Your questions and comments are only seen by presenters and ReviewPro staff. We'll answer as many as time permits during the live Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We also invite you to share your favorite tips, ideas, and questions on Twitter. Be sure to include @ReviewPro and the SM webinar hashtag in your tweets. Now, we are recording this webinar, and a link to the recording and a copy of these slides will be sent to all registrants within the next few days. You'll find all our webinars, as well as a wealth of how-to guides, case studies, and trend articles in ReviewPro's resource hub at reviewpro.com. Now, we're going to kick things off today with a quick poll, and we'll ask you, using the pop-up window on your screen, tell us which of the following does your hotel or brand have in place? Check all that apply. And we'll give you a quick moment to quickly answer that, and then we will share the results live with everyone, just to get a general idea of where our attendees are. We've got a great turnout for today's session, so it'll be interesting to see people from all over the world where you're focusing some of your efforts. All right, so if you haven't answered the poll now, please do so, and we'll be closing the poll in just a moment. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll and look at the results. So 65% of attendees today have response policies in place, 67%, almost the same amount, guidelines on how to respond, 66%, very close, all three of these, review and or survey management tool like ReviewPro. 51% have response templates in place, so about half of you. And then again, about half of you have performance targets in place. So it sounds like many of you have some or all of these elements in place, which is good to hear because they form the ingredients of a comprehensive response strategy. Today, we're going to explore these elements and more. We'll start by discussing response objectives and strategies and key differences between reviews and surveys. Then we'll bring in our presenter from Barceló Hotel Group to get insight into how to approach response strategy. We'll look at responding tools, tips, and KPIs, and we'll end the webinar with a Q&A session with our panelists. I'm excited to have as our special guest today a person with extensive expertise on the topic of responding to guest feedback, Silvia Battistella, online reputation manager at Barceló Hotel Group. Also with us today is another seasoned expert and an all-around great guy, Neil James, VP of Account Management at ReviewPro. Now, to get things rolling, here's Neil to tell us a little bit about ReviewPro, sponsors of today's free webinar. Over to you, Neil.
Thank you, Daniel. At ReviewPro, we help hotels and other hospitality organizations to listen to their customers and act on feedback quickly and efficiently to deliver better guest experiences. We started out as the best partner for hotels to measure their online reputation on a group or brand level. Over time, this has evolved, and today more and more our focus is on how we can help our clients to exceed guest expectations. So what exactly do we do? Next slide. We provide a complete view of everything that is being said by guests across all channels. Guest Intelligence combines all the feedback you get from the online reviews with the direct feedback you get from guest satisfaction surveys, both in-stay and post-stay. It's much more than just monitoring what is being said or KPIs. It's about actionable insight that staff can use to make improvements where it matters most. We've been in the market now for a long time, and we decided to develop our guest survey solution and more recently our case management and guest messaging hub solutions based on clients expressing a need. Next slide. So today at ReviewPro, we work with more than 35,000 hotels worldwide. And this has given us a unique perspective in how we see hotels succeeding through listening to their guests, acting on feedback, and making operational and service improvements where it matters most. And by doing so, they are able to increase online review volume, improve their rankings on TripAdvisor and other review sites, and more importantly, boost revenue. Back over to you, Daniel.
All right, thank you very much, Neil. We'll bring Neil back a little bit later in the webinar to talk about a few more of the features offered by ReviewPro to help you with responding. Right now, so as we've discussed in previous webinars, we can identify 4 key steps to guest feedback management. 1, listen to guest feedback so that you understand their perspective. 2, take action based on the feedback to resolve issues and make improvements. 3, respond to show that you're listening. And 4, earn positive reviews and guest loyalty. Well, today our focus is on step 3, responding. Specifically, we'll be talking about response strategy. For help in other areas, you can download these free guides in the resources section of the ReviewPro website. For guidelines and best practices, check out the guide, How to Respond to Guest Feedback in Online Reviews, Surveys, and in Person. For advice on how to respond to negative feedback, check out Brand Attacks, Protect and Restore Your Hotel's Online Reputation. And for tips and guidelines from today's webinar, you can check out the guide, Effective Management Response Strategies for Reviews and Surveys. Now, many of you with us today are seasoned veterans when it comes to responding, but with so many details to worry about every day, it's easy to get distracted from the big picture. Why exactly do you respond to reviews and surveys, and what are you trying to achieve? Objectives may vary by hotel and brand, but generally everyone shares similar objectives. These include show that you're listening to guests and you care about guest satisfaction, change perceptions in the event of negative comments. For online reviews, responding is a chance to reassure travelers that they're making the right booking choice. And it's an opportunity to highlight positive comments, show appreciation for feedback, and increase guest loyalty, advocacy, and bookings. Online reviews are unique to other forms of social media because once you respond, the conversation thread ends. On Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, people can reply to responses, and virtually anyone can join in, and conversations can become quite lengthy and involved. In this respect, reviews are lower maintenance than other forms of social media, but the challenge is that you don't know how people react to your responses. Are they satisfied, irritated, or outraged? Are they even paying attention? Well, research tells us that yes, absolutely, travelers do read management responses and use them to help guide booking decisions. Studies have found that hotels that regularly respond to reviews benefit not only from higher ratings, but also from more booking inquiries. As further proof, a 2015 survey from Phocuswright of almost 15,000 TripAdvisor users found that 4 out of 5 respondents believe that hotels that respond to reviews care more about their guests. 65% said they're more likely to book a hotel that responds to reviews, and 69% agreed that an aggressive or defensive response to a bad review makes them less likely to book a hotel. So if you're feeling underappreciated, have heart. Your efforts are making a difference. But the simple act of responding is not enough. To be truly effective, you must take a strategic approach to achieving your objectives. Strategies can be broken down into 5 main areas: response policies, roles and responsibilities, guidelines for staff, tools and templates, and performance metrics. We're going to look at each of these areas in a bit more detail today. It's important to acknowledge the differences between reviews and surveys because they can help guide your strategy. First, reviews are sometimes solicited, meaning the hotel or brand asks the guest for a review. And they're sometimes unsolicited, meaning the guest posted the review without being asked. Surveys, on the other hand, are always solicited by hotels. Depending on the source, reviews can be either verified to be from actual guests or unverified and anonymous, whereas surveys are always verified and you know who the guest is. Further, online reviews are public and written for travelers, so there's an important marketing aspect to them. Both the review and your response can influence the perceptions and booking behavior of travelers. Guest surveys, on the other hand, are private, sent directly to the hotel and intended for the eyes of hotel or corporate staff. This provides opportunities to resolve issues in private, to build relationships and loyalty with guests, and to prevent negative reviews as well as encourage positive reviews. These differences all come into play when setting response strategies. First, who should respond? Hotel staff or corporate staff or both? If it's hotel staff, who should it be? There are pros and cons to each scenario, and we'll discuss them a bit later in the webinar. Next, which feedback should you respond to? Because review comments are intended for travelers, reviewers don't really expect a response from the hotel. But surveys are sent directly to the hotel or brand, so guests are more likely to expect a response, especially if they have a complaint. The review source is important too. You'll get a lot more exposure by responding to reviews on TripAdvisor and Booking.com than on small, obscure sites that don't generate many bookings. And then comes the question, how quickly to respond. Generally, the sooner the better, especially in the case of negative feedback. According to TripAdvisor, most travelers read 6 to 12 reviews of a hotel before making a booking decision. If you respond to reviews posted a month ago, there's much less chance travelers will see it compared to reviews posted yesterday. So the more recent reviews must be the priority. Some hotel companies have a policy of responding to 100% of reviews, but this can leave staff scrambling to keep up, running behind, and rushing through responses. A Cornell study found that the optimal number of reviews to respond to is about 40%. Any less or any more, and the revenue benefits diminish. But I wouldn't take this number at face value because there were many variables in the study that may not apply to your hotel or brand. Every brand needs to decide for themselves the optimal number based on your objectives and the resources you have available. What's most important, in my opinion, is writing timely, meaningful, and professional responses. So what does a smart response strategy look like? Our next guest is here to share her perspective. With a background in marketing and applied communications, Sylvia Battistella started in tourism as a receptionist, entertainer, and travel agent at Club Med. She spent time in Paris as head of advertising for a tourism magazine before moving to Sicily, where she worked in various hospitality positions. Then she moved to Mallorca to work in sales and marketing at Marriott Vacation Club. And in 2013, she joined Iberostar as a quality manager before moving to Barcelo Hotel Group in 2016 as online reputation manager. Founded 80 years ago in Mallorca, Barcelo Hotel Group is one of the world's leading holiday companies with more than 230 hotels in over 20 countries and 4 main hotel brands: Royal Hideaway Luxury Hotels, Barcelo Hotels and Resorts, Occidental Hotels and Resorts, and Allegro Hotels. Sylvia, welcome to the webinar, and thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi, Daniel. Thank you for having me.
So Sylvia, I thought to start off, I understand that you've responded to a few hotel reviews over the years. Can you tell us how many?
Well, considering that I've been dealing with reviews since 2013, and that during my time at Iberostar, we had a target of 400 responses per month. And my current role here at Barcelona, I would say around 20,000 reviews in 4 languages, English, French, Italian, and Spanish.
20,000, wow. So you could write the book on reviews, literally.
I could.
So it's only been in recent years that hotel companies have created the role of online reputation manager. Can you tell us a little bit about your previous role at Iberostar and your current role at Barcelona?
Yes, of course. Well, I've been working for 3 years at Iberostar, and my role was to give personalized responses to online reviews for specific markets, English, French, and Italian, for the 50 plus hotels in the EMEA region. I was in constant contact with the management teams in the hotels to gather information so as to guarantee meaningful responses based on the information reported by users. Part of my tasks was using ReviewPro KPIs and its semantic analysis tool to analyze the online reputation of our hotels and identify areas of improvement and then escalate possible issues repeatedly reported by guests on review sites. My main role here at Barcelona consists in teaching our hotel teams how to manage and respond to online reviews with periodic trainings both in face-to-face classes and distance learning, and assisting them whenever they need guidance for reviews that may critically affect the online reputation both at hotel and company level. I'm also in charge of teaching the hotel teams the use of ReviewPro on both online reputation management and guest satisfaction survey tools to help them identify areas of concern and improvement and to enhance their guest satisfaction and consequent reputation of their hotels. I also collaborate with our corporate community manager and the external communication agencies we work with whenever a user mentions Barcelona or a specific hotel negatively to avoid social media spreading. Last but not least, I also manage offline complaints that guests wish to escalate to the corporate office or that may land in the president or the CEO offices.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, a key difference when it comes to responding between Iberostar and Barcelona is at Iberostar, you were actively responding to reviews in several languages on behalf of hotels, whereas at Barcelona now you are, the hotels are responding and you're providing training and support to help them with that effort,
That's correct. Exactly. That's correct.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. It's interesting to see how every hotel company sets up this whole system because it tends to be a little bit different at each company or individual hotel. Now, can you tell us a bit about Barcelona's strategy and performance metrics when it comes to responding?
Yes, of course. Well, as you said before, at Barcelona, the hotel teams, it may be the guest experience manager or members of the management team are responsible for responding to online reviews. We respond in all channels except Top Hotels and Ctrip, for which you need to have a contract to publish a response. Our management responses targets are 100% of the negative reviews, 50% of the neutral, and 25% of the positive. All have to be responding within a maximum of 3 days. The ideal would be on the same day, of course. We also have a rating scale for the quality of the answers that go from 1, which would be very bad, and we don't have any, of course, to 5, excellent. And each month I review the quality of our responses, and the results of all KPIs are then shared during the monthly committees. So the entire organization is aware of the importance of the coverage, the average time to publish a review, and the quality of the responses and our public communication at a general level.
Okay, so that's interesting. So clearly communication on these KPIs is key. Now, I find it interesting that you're actually rating the responses.
The quality.
So can you tell us a little bit more about how that works?
Yes, well, each month I review a region. We have 4 regions for hotels here in EMEA. And each month I review a region, the quality of the responses, meaning that, for example, I review that they don't repeat themselves too much in the answers, that the answers are not too generic, and mostly that they give useful information to the travel community to help them make the decision to book the hotel.
All right, so as a hotel manager, not only do I have the pressure when I'm writing a response that travelers are going to read my response, but now I also know that Sylvia is going to be rating my response.
And you'll receive a score, exactly.
And receive a score. Okay, that's a very interesting approach to ensuring and encouraging the quality of responses. Mm-hmm. Now, so you've worked with both systems. Which do you think is more effective, corporate office or managers on property responding, and why?
Well, now that I've been able to appreciate both systems, I believe that both approaches can work, responding on property or by corporate office. It really depends on the business model of each company, really. Some of the advantages and disadvantages of each approach, for example, the pros of corporate management responses. Well, TripAdvisor and review sites are important marketing channels for hotels. If you have experts in sales and marketing communication, you can guarantee that responses will always be geared towards selling the hotel. The people responding should know how to communicate with the markets the hotel serves, because you don't communicate the same way to a French guest as to a German or Spanish guest. Every nationality has its own holiday expectations, and each have their own priorities during a vacation. It's critical to publish responses in the languages the hotel company serves. At Barceló, that means Spanish, German, English, French, and Italian as main markets. And each market is a potential travel community that we want to capture. And we can only do that if we're able to communicate in their language. And then hotel teams are busy. They have many different tasks during the day and little time to dedicate to responding to reviews. Some hotels receive up to 20 reviews per day, while corporate staff are busy too, of course, but they have fewer distractions. The cons of corporate management of responses, well, there may be less involvement and accountability on the part of the operation team if reviews are being managed at a corporate level or externally. The risk is that guest feedback becomes less of a priority. The people in charge of responding may not be sufficiently familiar with hotel operations or knowledgeable of the hotels, and this may affect their ability to communicate effectively and reassure the travel community, especially when it comes to complaints. There also may be a longer delay between the time the review is published and the time the response appears online, because the person in charge of responding has to gather relevant information from the hotel team, and this can take time. And reviews published by guests during their stay may not be noticed or acted upon right away, missing the opportunity to change a negative experience into a positive one by contacting the guest immediately while they are still on property. The pros of the on-property management of responses, well, new reviews are seen immediately and can be answered on the spot. There are no weekends or bank holiday delays. Hotel teams know their hotel better than anyone else and know its strengths and weaknesses. They can explain their improvements that have been implemented and can ensure that negative comments related to a specific issue do not recur. There is higher involvement within the hotel team regarding feedback. At Barceló, guest comments are passed through the cases tool in Review Pro for the department involved to act immediately. The same goes for reviews published during the guest stay. The hotel team can contact the guest immediately and take action to improve the experience before the guest leaves. And hotel teams know their guests and can easily identify malicious reviews and report them. The cons of on-property management of responses, well, there can be a lack of foreign language proficiency. Speaking and writing are absolutely two different matters. Therefore, it can be tricky to respond to specific feedback and sound authentic, giving useful information without sounding repetitive. Hotel teams may take feedback personally because they deal directly with guests, and it's a challenge to not sound defensive and to maintain objectivity, especially when guests post negative comments about hotel staff. So these would be the pros and cons of both managements.
Okay, great. Well laid out. Interesting. Of course, this really applies mostly to hotel groups, and not every hotel group has the luxury of a dedicated online reputation manager like yourself. But
right.
even in the situation with Barceló, they have online reputation manager, but the properties are still responding to reviews themselves.
Exactly.
With independent hotels, small groups, I guess they have no choice. They respond on property, and that's just a matter of deciding who is the best equipped to respond, and certainly it should always come from a senior manager. Okay, thanks, Sylvia. There's just to our listeners, there's a great blog post on the Review Pro website, an interview with Sylvia where she outlines these pros and cons in some other areas. Definitely a good read that I recommend. I want to move on to the next question for you. Now, some hotels have a policy, as I mentioned before, of responding to 100% of reviews. I'm curious, Sylvia, what your opinion is on this topic.
Well, I think that the quantity is not important. The quality of the responses should be the priority, and you can't ensure a high level of communication if you are pressured to reach targets. It's not a matter of numbers, really. It's a matter of being able to write meaningful answers that give relevant information to the travel community to help potential guests make the decision to book your hotel, and not just repetitive acknowledgement of aspects mentioned in reviews. How many ways do you have to thank a user for mentioning the kindness of the staff or the cleanliness of a room without sounding repetitive? Also, I believe that users generally publish a review that is aimed at communicating to the travel community, not necessarily to the business itself, so it could be taken as an intrusion of the business. And some others, generally for positive reviews, want to thank a member of the team or wish to give the business an opportunity to improve through constructive critics. And I believe that these reviews should be the priority.
Okay, so you and I are more or less on the same page there. Listeners, we've got a couple more questions for Sylvia, but feel free to, if you have questions for Sylvia, we'll try to answer a couple of them on the fly now before the Q&A session. So feel free to send in any questions for Sylvia using the module on your screen. I do want to ask you to briefly comment on the issue of languages having responded in so many different languages. Sylvia, how do you think that hotels should handle responding to reviews in multiple languages?
Well, depending on who is in charge of responding within the hotel, they should seek support from their staff if they have reviews in a language they are not confident with. I believe that if you have a large market in the hotel, it is common sense that you have natives in your team who will be able to communicate with the hotel's main markets. So just seek help within the hotel, basically, within your team.
Sure. And do you think that people should respond? What if they get a review in, say, Dutch, and they don't have anyone who speaks fluently in Dutch? Is it better not to respond, do you think, or what should they do?
No, I think that you should respond. You should acknowledge every review, and or at least every market that you have. If you have just few guests, the Dutch guests, then you can easily respond in English. But then if it's a major market for your hotel, then I believe you should have somebody able to speak in Dutch. And then
if it's a major market.
Language. Mm-hmm.
Sure. Yeah, and I think ideally in a perfect world, we'd always respond in the language that the review is written. And I guess also caution against using Google Translate or other translation features.
No.
You don't recommend using them for writing responses?
I really don't recommend that, no.
No, that's very dangerous. Certainly for translating the review to understand what it says, but not for writing responses, correct?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, okay. All right, and then wanted to ask, one of the things that hoteliers struggle with is, they want to create efficiencies like using templates, because often there's a high volume of reviews to respond to. But how do you do that and still be authentic?
Well, they can build response templates. We have one ourselves with many different options for response beginnings and endings depending on the reviews classification, and mostly making sure they do not repeat these in the same first 2 pages of the same review sites. So don't repeat the same sentences. Don't use the same sentences. But I truly recommend writing all responses from scratch. For negative reviews with many negative aspects mentioned, choose using common sense, the 3 most critical ones at a reputation level, and address correctly the issues reported.
Okay, thank you. And I was just reviewing, there's lots of questions for you coming in. I told you told you there'd be lots of questions. But first, let's, before we go to take a couple questions, I'm wondering if you can share your top tips for effective review responses.
Of course. Well, first of all, be transparent about your services. Don't create expectations that you can give. Recognize when you may have made a mistake and explain which procedures you have in place to avoid this from happening in the future. Then never contradict a user publicly. Don't argue online. Be neutral. Do not take things personally. Users know that truth stands in the middle. As I said before, users normally read between 6 and 12 reviews, so they know the truth stands in the middle. Respond specifically to what the user says and share useful information that will help your travel community to make their decision. Avoid generic or repetitive responses that are totally useless to the travel community. Be authentic and use emotional intelligence. Be informed about each review site's publication guidelines. For example, TripAdvisor is, I believe, the most business-friendly portal that allows businesses to dispute reviews and report blackmail. And that would be my tips.
And that's a lot of tips. That's great. So, can I ask you a couple listener questions now?
Of course.
Great. Okay. So there's a lot of questions about translate apps, translation apps. Do you use? There's a tool built right within Review Pro. I think, and Neil can probably touch on this a little bit later. But what do you use?
Well, we use the tool of Review Pro, of course,
right.
To translate reviews that we don't understand, for example, in Chinese or Turkish or whatever language we don't know, to understand the review. But then again, we usually enter in English for that.
Right. Okay. And I think we'll ask Neil about how the Translate works, but I suspect it's Google Translate integrated into the app. Someone was mentioning that if there's a better translation app than Google Translate, because it doesn't always work that well, but I think Google has been spending a lot of money on its Translate services, in part because of the growth of voice, and it's gotten better and better. It's incredible, but again,
it's
to the
improving.
point. You find that too?
Yes, it's improving, but we're still quite not there.
Not to the point.
At least to be able to write an answer, I don't know, in Spanish and then translate it through Google and publish it in English with the translation of Google. I wouldn't do that.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And there's a couple questions related to, I guess, quite a few people are just responding in English to all languages, probably because they don't have the language resources available to do it professionally in other languages. What are your thoughts on that approach?
Well, it's better than nothing. I mean, English is the common language, mostly in the industry. But I think that you should try to find a way to answer to at least to your main markets in their own languages.
Yeah, I would agree. And sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it.
That's it. Okay. And as a general rule, we've talked about this before. If you can't do like a good, professional, thoughtful job of responding, it's probably better not to respond at all. Would you agree with that?
Yes, yes, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
You have to put a lot of effort to be able to give a useful information basically to your travel community. So if you really don't think it's important to answer to a review, then don't do that. And mostly do not publish repetitive responses or generic responses like "thank you for your comment, we hope to see you soon." It's absolutely useless. So better not to respond, in my point of view.
Yeah, and that's where responding selectively, as opposed to responding to 100% of reviews, can come into play. Yeah, exactly. Excellent. Really appreciate you sharing all your experience and expertise. Sylvia, if you can stand by, we will bring you back. We have more questions for you. We'll bring you back for the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. But okay, for now, we are going to move on to our next poll. So if we can ask our listeners to quickly, please tell us, what is your hotel or your hotel group's policy on responding to guest feedback? And yeah, it says check all that apply, but actually just check one if you could, and we'll give you a minute to complete that poll, and then I'll share it with the group so that we can have a general idea of the hundreds of people who are in attendance today from around the world, what they're doing when it comes to responding to guest feedback. All right, so if you haven't voted now, if you could please do so. And we've got a couple more coming in now. And all right, I think we can close the poll and look at the results. All right, so 64% are responding to all reviews and surveys. Very interesting. I think it's been part of a trend that we've been seeing in recent years, that it's corporate policy, respond to all reviews because of the benefits. So we hear, those of you who are responding to every review, we understand your challenges. And 30% are responding to all or most negative and some neutral and positive feedback, okay? 15% don't have a set policy, we respond as appropriate, and only 1% don't respond at all. So very active community here. And you know, as I said before, there's no one rule for all types of hotels and hotel groups. You have to figure out what works best for you. And part of that is monitoring those metrics and seeing what kind of results you're getting over time, and then adjusting your strategy where necessary. All right, thanks for contributing to that poll. We are going to bring Neil back now, and he's going to discuss tools, tips, and KPIs for responding. Neil.
Great, thank you, Daniel. So first of all, we're going to look at the possibility of setting objectives for responding to online reviews. First of all, I think it's key to take into account that not all sites offer the option to respond to reviews. So whenever you're setting objectives for responding, it's key to make sure that you're taking into account only those reviews that are respondable rather than the total volume of reviews. You can set various objectives based on the response strategy. For example, one of those you may look at is to focus on the 100% of negative reviews in key languages across specific OTAs, and make sure, for example, that those reviews are responded to within at least 72 hours. It's important here also to focus on the timeliness of response. For example, if your team are taking 5 days or more on average to respond to reviews, then it could just be a fact that you're wasting resources because as very few of these responses will be viewable by the potential guest. You know, they may end up being, by the time that you respond, if it's taking 5 days, that response could eventually be on page 4 or page 5 by the time it gets published. Therefore, as Sylvia mentioned earlier, you know, it's really, really important here to ensure that you're prioritizing reviews for response and making sure which ones are going first. In addition, just to come back to one of the points that were mentioned earlier as well about the languages of reviews, it's taken into account as well that some of the sites actually don't allow you to respond in other languages. If you don't respond in the language of the review, then they just won't publish it. So it's important to track and understand site by site what their actual policies are as well. Next slide, please, Daniel. So another part of your management response strategy should also be around tracking and managing of your performance. In the ReviewPro Management Response Center, we actually provide you the ability to monitor the volume of respondable reviews, your actual current response ratio. You can identify your current average response time. You can also set views by sources, so you can check to see what your percentage of response ratio is by source, and you can divide these between positive, neutral, and negative reviews. You can also identify how many reviews from collection programs, if you're using survey tools to collect reviews on the likes of TripAdvisor or Google or Holiday Check, then you can identify how many of those you've actually responded to. In the screenshot on the right here as well, it's illustrating the fact that you can create views in the tool so that you can identify your view just of those negative reviews that have not been responded to. This helps the person who's responsible for replying to reviews to prioritize the responses and ensures they know exactly what they need to respond to. It's also key to consider here that if you have a daily process at your property for responding to reviews, the volume becomes more manageable. The more and more that we speak to hoteliers around the globe, the key comments are that there's a lot of volume of reviews, but if you're focusing on specific reviews and prioritizing them and make sure they're responded to daily, then the volume becomes a lot more manageable. Next slide, please, Daniel. A great feature that we also offer is the ability to be able to track how your response ratio is doing on key sources in comparison to your competitors. And you can click on each of the sources and see how many reviews you've responded to on that source against the competition. This obviously enables you to identify whether your competitors are replying to a higher percentage of reviews on important channels than you are, how quickly they're responding, and how your average time for response compares to them. And this is key, and this can help you identify maybe if you want to change strategy next week on responding, for example, to focus on Expedia reviews because your competition have been responding on this and you haven't. So it's a great tool. Next slide, please. So then we also look at, responding on surveys, and we can look at the post-stay surveys as well as the in-stay surveys. So an example of responding and objectives of response on post-stay would be looking at the 100% of negative responses in key languages, identify maybe responding to the 100% of the promoters, and again, making sure that you're setting a time to respond that in this case for post-stay could be within 72 hours. For in-stay surveys, however, the focus should be to speed up the response so that issues can be resolved quickly. So for example, here you may be looking at responding to 100% of the responses where the guests are saying that they actually have an issue while they're still on property, and making sure that we're addressing these responses within 2 hours. Key point here is that the response might not always be an email. You may have an action by follow-up directly with the guest, by contacting them by phone, in whichever way is more powerful at the moment. Next slide, please. In the ReviewPro Management Response Center as well, you can actually identify your response ratio against problem question, look at your average response time, look at the response ratio by satisfaction score, or also by NPS, looking at your promoters, passives, and detractors. And also we have a great feature within the survey functionality when you're responding to guests, where once they receive the management response from you or a member of the team, they actually have a option to say whether the management response was useful or not. And then this feeds back into ReviewPro. So it gives a great opportunity to be able to do a follow-up for any of those guests that felt that our response wasn't quite right. Next slide. So A key thing here is to remember that reviews obviously are public. So if you choose to use response templates, make sure that the message is adapted so that it does not look like a robotic answer. Responses should always provide helpful and meaningful information, which again is stating what Sylvia mentioned earlier. On the other hand, where survey responses are not public, you can consider using templates, which can be extremely useful and increase your efficiency. You can use this as an opportunity, for example, to encourage customer loyalty and identify those high satisfied guests or promoters using a template that maybe sends them a thank you email and welcoming them back in the future with a discount code for future bookings. So there's great opportunities to use the templates within the surveys. Next slide. So the next thing that I wanted to cover was a case study that we have with the Radisson Hotel Group, who have actually implemented our auto case management tool to set up their strategy for responding. So the Radisson Hotel Group has long been synonymous with quality service. As one of the world's fastest growing hotel companies and operators of multiple brands, including the Radisson Blu, Park Inn by Radisson, Radisson Red, and Radisson Collection brands, online reputation is of the utmost importance. And this is what prompted their decision to implement ReviewPro's Guest Intelligence Suite, including online reputation management and the guest satisfaction surveys in January of 2017. Next slide. So when the Radisson Hotel Group decided to implement the auto case functionality with the responding, they had some key objectives that they wanted to achieve. They were keen on looking to optimize the strategy for responding to online reviews. They wanted to ensure that they implemented a streamlined internal process. They were also looking for the ability to monitor response rates and response times and make sure that they responded faster to online reviews while ensuring that the brand is well represented online. Next slide. So Radisson Hotel Group rolled out the auto case management across their 364 properties in EMEA. ReviewPro provided them with the necessary support to help them create the automation rules required in order to manage the online reviews. The online training that we provided enabled Radisson Hotel Group to roll out the new tool and process seamlessly across the organization. The automation rule that we actually created ensured that for all negative reviews that are respondable reviews, a case was created that was assigned to the GM. This gave the GM 48 hours to respond to the review and then close the case. If the case was not closed within the 48 hours, the case was then escalated to a call center who would take over the responsibility of responding to the reviews. They applied this rule to all negative reviews across 7 key OTAs they identified in the 8 key languages where they felt required responding. Next slide, please. So having done this, the results after 3 months identified, as you can see on the left here, that they actually created over 8,400 cases. Nearly 4,000 of those cases got escalated for response. This did then help them increase their response ratio year on year from 82% to 92%. And the key thing is that it shows that their average response time for responding to reviews actually dropped from 6.3 days to 3 days, which hits the 72 hours that we spoke about. Thank you, Daniel. Hand it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Neil. As you know, I've been collaborating with ReviewPro almost since the beginning, and it's great to see, like, over the years, so many amazing tools and features have been added to the ReviewPro dashboard. One of them that I thought was interesting is that, so guests, when a manager posts a management response, guests can say whether it's useful or not. That's just for guest surveys, correct?
That's correct, Daniel, yeah.
Okay. So another way that, like Sylvia's company, Barcelo, they rate management responses, but that's another way of measuring the effectiveness of survey responses, at least by finding out guests if they found them helpful. I love it. So Neil, we had lots of questions come in for you. Now, a lot of them are really kind of technical and very specific. So we're going to answer those questions offline. Someone at Review Pro will be in touch. But there was a question that I thought was interesting from Justine, and she was asking, how do we link a review, i.e. a survey, and a survey from the same person? Is that possible?
That's a really good question. Currently, so there's a couple of things that we do track. So for example, in the surveys, we do have the review collection program with the likes of TripAdvisor, Google, and Holiday Check. And specifically a feature that we released just this week, actually, is the ability to be able to identify at least if a review from a guest has come via the review collection program at the end of the survey, and be able to then identify the survey that that guest responded to, as well as the review that they actually wrote on TripAdvisor. In order to be able to identify, furthermore, it becomes a lot more difficult because usernames and so on across the OTAs are challenging. But in the case like in this with TripAdvisor, where we're given the data, then absolutely, yes, you can identify the survey and the review that came after that.
Okay, good to know. Thank you, Neil. We're going to bring back Sylvia now, and we'll open up the floor to questions. Still have a couple more questions for Neil, and we will ask you to send your questions using the sidebar on your screen. We'll answer as many as time permits in the next 9 minutes or so. One, I thought this comes up every time we have a webinar related to reviews and particularly responding, but curious to hear from you on this issue, Sylvia. Giovanni asks us, how do you manage negative reviews that are actually blackmail?
That are blackmail. Well, first of all, if it's a blackmail, you know that before the review is published, because the guest may have told you at reception to a team member that if they don't receive a free upgrade for whatever reason, or a freebie for whatever reason, then they'll publish a negative review on TripAdvisor generally. So the first thing that you have to do is collect, if you have it, the email of the guest, the name, and all the information about the guest, and then report the blackmail to TripAdvisor. And you can do that through the management center. It's really easy. It takes 5 minutes. And then TripAdvisor will check your profile. And if a guest or user tries to publish a review that corresponds with your report, then it will block the review and maybe ask you for more information. So that's the only way really to deal with blackmail, is just as soon as a guest threats with publishing a negative review, just report that to TripAdvisor. It's more difficult to report that in OTAs, of course. It's useless. You can't do that because normally they consider that, well, there are clients of the OTA, so they won't want to lose a guest, to lose a client. But you can do that with review sites, and mainly TripAdvisor, which is the most important one. So that would be my advice. Be prepared to report immediately.
Report immediately. And also keep in mind that in these situations, TripAdvisor's on your side. They don't want this kind of behavior. They don't want users abusing the system. And so it's a matter of being persistent and recording the information, following up. So thanks, Sylvia. Also, that one of the guides I mentioned based on social media attacks on the Review Pro website actually addresses quite specifically how to deal with review blackmail. So you can check that out as well. All right, this is from Mohammed, and I'm not sure, Neil, if you can weigh in here, or maybe Sylvia, but he's mentioning that, you know, management responses, the updates being posted, there can be a delay, especially with Booking.com. Does anybody know how long it normally takes for Booking.com to post responses?
That's a really good question, Daniel. I think the correct answer here is that it can vary depending on volume and the time of year. Sometimes you can see the responses go live in 4 to 8 hours, and sometimes it can take a lot longer. I don't think there's any actual real general rule. Maybe Sylvia can provide more information on her experience, but that's what we see.
Yes, that's correct. You don't have a time frame. But what I saw lately with Booking is that there can be huge delays because maybe some answers are just not verified, or just are stuck in some control system of Booking. And then the only tip I can give to hotel teams, to my hotel teams, is that just delete the answer and try to publish it again, and then it will go smoother. And then it depends on the language you're responding to the review. If, for example, you are proficient in Japanese, and then you answer in Japanese to a Japanese review, it can take more time for the portal to publish your answer than if you would answer in English, for example, because maybe they have more moderators in the English language than in Japanese. So that's my point of view.
Okay. All right. Thanks to you both. And one of our listeners, Merle, mentioned that her experience, or their experience, is 3 to 4 days. And there's a question, actually, I guess a quick question for you, Neil. Is it from Sandra? Is it possible to respond directly from ReviewPro to online reviews across different OTAs?
Yes, so we do have the ability to do that on the sites that enable us to access directly. What we have, as we showed on the screen earlier, is the ability to be able to create views in order to prioritize the reviews that require response. In most cases, a lot of those sites don't actually give us a direct link to respond directly within one click. So you would sometimes need to identify the review you're responding to. However, as long as you've actually saved the passwords and logins into your browser, the process is really quick. And actually, I was at a GM conference last week where I was informed that the process within ReviewPro is much faster than competing tools in the industry, which is great to hear.
Well, there you go. Excellent. Okay. Interesting question from Andrea. I'll throw it out to you, Sylvia. It's regarding Google My Business. How do you manage unverified reviews? Many times users use nicknames, or I guess anonymous, so to find it on the PMS is nearly impossible. So do you respond to these reviews?
Yes, we do respond in Google. It's really tricky to report a review in Google. It's really complicated, and the only way that you can do that is by flagging the review on the public page. But it's really complicated. We have received last year many reviews from taxis that were near a hotel in Madrid, and because we used other transportations for our guests, and then we received many reviews from taxis, negative reviews, and we have managed to delete some of them, not all, because I believe that Google is becoming more and more important, but their guidelines are not real clear. So for the moment it's tricky, but I think they're working on it. But it's really difficult to report a review on Google, that's for sure.
Yeah, Google reviews have been a mess for years. They've finally, it looks like they're paying more attention to their review products, but they still, they do have a long way to go. We have run out of time. One last question from Romina, which is a good transition to our last slide. She says, how do you manage fake reviews? big topic in the era of fake news, but I'll just direct you. We've actually addressed that whole topic at length in our guides here, which you see on the screen, particularly the brand attacks. But certainly a short answer with fake reviews is, of course, is to dispute as you can and respond, but never be defensive or aggressive, as we talked about later. I'm sorry that we didn't get to everyone's questions, but some of the technical questions we'll try to respond to through ReviewPro, and we will be sending a link to the recorded webinar and slides to all of you, all people who registered. And a reminder, you can download these 3 guides on the screen on the ReviewPro's Resource Hub. So I'd like to extend a huge thanks to our special guest, Silvia Battistella of Barceló Hotel Group, and to Neil James and all the crew at ReviewPro for making this free webinar possible. And thanks to all of you, all of our attendees, for joining us today. We look forward to welcoming you back for our next webinar.